Okay, Andre. Nice to be your guest at your house, and I'm so happy that you invited me, and we already met before many times in the European Union, and but once we met here in your house, and we discussed different periods of your life, and you were explaining, telling the stories about how you went to India, how you started your spiritual practice, many stories, and I thought it would be just I thought it was very interesting, and I wanted to share it with other people, with my students, and with many other yogis out there who are just starting their spiritual path. So I'm here to ask you many questions, and many questions about your. I'll get back to the questions, but the main guest, Andre Rieu, the president of Federation of Yoga, of Traditional Yoga, which is a part of European Union, which is a part of the Indian Association, Yoga Association, a person with lots of experience in the spiritual practices, in yoga, and a very good friend of mine. It's so nice to have this opportunity. I hope this goes well, and we'll share the good and interesting stories and helpful stories for other people who are out there doing yoga.
Thank you, Dimitri.
So, Andre, I selected some questions that I wanted to ask you about different parts of your life, spiritual life, and the traveling life. From what I know, you had, and yesterday you were telling new stories about your experience in communist countries back in the 70s, and I think this would be very interesting for many people out there, especially for the Ukrainian friends and yogis that who'll be watching this. And there is also stories about how you started your spiritual practice, and the stories about how you went to India back in the 70s and over Afghanistan and all those trails in the mountains and in these wild countries which are close to the Westerners nowadays. Yeah. So this would be a good opportunity for you to explain all these things, and I hope we will have the photos of some of the photos you showed me. I hope we will also have it in the video. And of course, about your practice, how it changed over the years, and what you think about yoga. So also, I also wanted to ask you about that. So please tell me, and to everybody, how many years do you do yoga? When did you start?
It's about 60 years now.
60 years.
I started as a child, and 60 years. I'll start by 9, 10, or 11. Don't remember precisely.
And how was it? How did you do it?
Oh, it's a very strange story. It's a very strange story. As a child, well, I come from a very, very working class family where it was a difficult financial situation. And my father has been a worker since the age of 14. And my mother was somebody who could read, but she couldn't really write. So very ordinary working class family, into which there was no book at all. The only book that we had was school books. So by the age of 9, 10, I don't remember exactly, I started having dreams of a character that would make me feel almost ecstatic during the dreams. And the day after, I was kind of out of the blue. And I was quite a good pupil at school, but when I had these dreams, the day after I was very, very happy sitting in the classroom, but I had a lot of difficulties in following the teachers. And that went on. From time to time, I had this character coming in the dreams, which didn't say anything, just an image. And it went on for years. And one day, my father took me to the hairdresser, and waiting for my turn, there was a magazine. And I was just going through the pages, and there was this character.
Who was it?
I'll tell you after.
I think your cat is also trying to participate in it.
Yes. So I took this magazine, I stole it, and took it home, and with kind of transparent paper I drew this character again, and I had a uncle who was a carpenter. So I asked him if we could make a big box, and I had a big glass, so I painted the glass in white, and I spotted with colors, painting blue, red, little spots, round spots, all colors. And I put this character that I have drawn behind the glass, and inside the box there was electric bulbs, different colors. And when I was coming back from school, I used to pluck this, and in my mind there was this face in the whole universe. The little spots were like stars, and he was looking at me. And that really kept me at the beginning happy, then questioning, and progressively quietening and quietening, being quiet and quiet and quiet. And then strange things start happening. I was pushed to do some physical position, and had visions, and I have sounds coming, and strange breathing also from time to time. Everything was, I didn't know what it was, and I didn't talk about it to my parents because they were really into another world. And that went on for quite a few years, and I never read the magazine. The image was enough. And later on, I read the magazine, and the man was called Ramakrishna. And then I was sent to a boarding school where I met a teacher of English. He was English, and he was a disciple of somebody called Lanza del Vasto, who was himself a disciple of Gandhiji. And I became friend with him, and then I came to know that these funny things I was doing had a name. It was called yoga.
And when was your conscious approach to yoga? So when you decided that you want to do some exercises, or read a book, or meet a teacher?
I never really read, even today. what I read is, I read texts, but I don't read all those books that you can find today of yoga exercises. I've read some later on, but just as a reference. Well, what happened in this story is that talking with this teacher, English teacher, he lent me a book on India philosophy that I started to read. I didn't understand a word. It was full of Sanskrit words and very strange concepts I didn't understand.
Do you remember the author?
No, but I still have the book with me. I can show you after.
Okay.
And I was into a school of agriculture. I was no more a good student at the secondary school. And slowly what came was that I realized I couldn't cope with the social life as it was. I really could not. And which was the suffering. And I started becoming very rebellious about it. There have been a strange period in France in 1968 where there was a kind of small revolution, so I took part in it, fighting against police and fighting with our fist. And I couldn't cope with the society. It was impossible for me to work, for example. I started. I worked for 3 days and I couldn't go on. And what came slowly was, it was a period in the 70s where music has a lot of importance. They call it pop music and pop music festival. So I went in some of them, and one very big one was the Isle of Wight in 1970. And then I was meeting people they had left everything, they've gone to Asia and India, coming back, and they were doing physical exercises, yoga asana, and I was just wondering, what's this, all this? But I felt so much attracted. We thought that we would change the world with music and love. We failed. We changed it a little, in fact, not so. And for the first time I met somebody from India who was selling handicraft.
Mm-hmm.
That was at this festival of Isle of Wight. And he came to me and said, I need somebody to help me in India for choosing the different object. Come. So that was like an atomic bomb in my head. But I couldn't go. I was young, I had 18, I had no money, I had no passport. But it was really, it was a big question. And during this festival I had a strong, what later on I understood was a deep spiritual experience. I had two of them. The first one was a kind of going into death, and it was an extremely high sensation of pure silence. And I was on the top of a cliff, and it suddenly happened. And the second was seeing all these people coming. Journalists said we were 500,000, which is quite a number. And seeing all these people arriving from the different roads, there was big flocks of people, long hair, beautiful hair, beautiful cloth, and it was still the period of flowers in your hair. It was still the hippie time. And I had another experience of togetherness with all these people. I didn't know they were spiritual experiences, but this moved me a lot. And when I came back, something has changed. I remember my mother was sitting with the postman. There was a few steps at the entrance of the garden of the house, and I pushed the gate, and I remember the postman say, "Who is this man?" And I walk maybe 2-3 meters, and my mother looked at me and say, "Oh, that is you? What happened?" So I don't know what I look like, but she didn't recognize me at first, which is so strange. Something had changed.
How long were you there?
Oh, it was maybe a 2-week trip. And the festival itself lasted 5 or 6 days. And from there, when I went back to school and I talked with this teacher, the idea came that I wasn't fit for the Western world. I had to go to India.
Did the teacher influence you in some way? Like, was he talking about India or yoga? Or?
Yes, he influenced me in the way that he himself was a strange character.
Oh, okay.
He was really unusual. For a teacher, we have never seen such a person like that. And by the time we became very close and we started teaching together what was called the counterculture. So we were teaching English through songs of Bob Dylan or Jack Kerouac, or there was all this movement already that I've started. And I got a job on the weekends. I was a disc jockey, DJ in nightclubs, and I spent all the money. And I failed my exam at the university, and I made a back and I left.
Mm-hmm.
So yoga was already within me, wasn't very clear, all the lineages, the practical aspect and all this wasn't clear. It was more like a love story. And that's how I left, with the idea of never coming back to this bloody West.
So did you go to India?
Yeah. I first left with a car, I went with a friend from school, and I had a car. My parents had bought me a car. And we were helped by a medical company here who gave us a lot of medicines to distribute on the way. And I remember we had guns with us because we were going to go through all Asia. And we crossed all Europe, and we had a bad story in Istanbul. We got robbed. During the night, somebody came in the room and took the money we had. And it was a huge deception for me. And I told my friend that I'm going back. He went on. So I came back, and it was a terrible thing. In my mind, it meant I have no place here, I have no place there. So it went on again for a few months. And then I left again. In those days, we have traveler's checks. So when you had those robbed, the bank would give you back. And then maybe less than a year after, I left again with another friend. So we first took a train to Italy for leaving quickly. And from Italy we walk till India.
That's a long walk.
Yeah, it took about 6 months. Sometimes we went on trucks or crossing borders. Sometimes we were taking bus because it was much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Crossing borders, walking.
So which year was that?
75, 76. And it was an extraordinary trip.
But you went to Italy, and from Italy, how were you working through
From Italy,
Yugoslavia, or?
yeah, we went through Yugoslavia, then Greece, then Turkey, then Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India.
Well, tell me more about that.
But there are hundreds of stories. What I right now remember is the morning when we arrived in India. We passed the border walking, and it was early morning, it was sunrise, and we were walking towards the sun, and we were in such a happy mood. It was extraordinary, extraordinary. We had met two girls, from Lahore in Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
two girls from New Zealand were afraid of going through Pakistan. They were right. It was really, really tough. And they kind of asked us if we could travel together. So we all arrived in India together. That was such a joy. And after crossing Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, which are Muslim countries where rules are so strict, except in Afghanistan, people were really easygoing. And arriving in India and facing those policemen or custom officer who had nothing to do with any kind of authority we had met before, they were very happy to see Westerners coming, walking. At that time I had a longer beard. And because we had traveled more like pilgrims than tourists. Well, in those days there was no tourism, didn't really exist in this country. And in fact, Indian, they kind of intuitively perceive how we inwardly were. And they were so welcoming. We also had a really tough time. Going through Turkey, for example, it was really difficult. I remember in eastern part of Turkey, we were hitchhiking, and we didn't know that when you do this in this country, it's an insult. Mm. And one day a car stopped and people came out and they wanted to beat us. They had sticks. That's the kind of thing. So we ran away, and it was okay. They didn't go very far. But I remember a terrible story in those days. Later on, I was living in Nepal near the Annapurna mountain, and I was very sick, and somebody took care of me, a Frenchman that I had met, and he found a couple of Swiss people who had those Volkswagen van,
Mhm.
and they were going down to Kathmandu. So they took us with them, and they were so sad, these people. And
Why were they sad?
Huh?
Why were they?
Yeah, so talking with them, they told us the story that when they were crossing Turkey, they had the son with them, and a little boy. And in Turkey, the roads are long, and it's a big plain, and peasants were not used at all to value the speed of the cars. And so they were crossing and they banged a child. And they had the wrong idea to stop. So the whole community came around the van, and they decided to kill their son as a revenge. So we had to face that kind of situation from time to time. It was really, really tough. Turkey was really tough at that time. Iran was, people were so strongly religious. We also met beautiful people, but we had many, many fears. And when we arrived, I remember a story, terrible story.
Collection of terrible stories. Yeah, please.
When we left Iran for coming to Afghanistan, so the border was in the middle of the desert. It was a long road, maybe 20 kilometers. So for crossing the borders, we always took bus. So we arrived at the border, so there was a building in the middle of nowhere, that was the Iranian border. And in those days, there was a law in Iran that if you get caught with any kind of drug, police could kill you, could hang you. And going through this building, it was terrible. There were photos of people hanged. There was shoes that were made in such a way that people could hide whatever they had, hashish or opium. Mm-hmm. And then we have to pass facing 3 policemen. So you were all naked with your bag in front of you. 2 of them had guns facing you, and the other one was searching in your bag. And it was well known that the one who would search in the bag could have put some drug in and then taking out. And then the game was either you give us all your money or we kill you. And it was a terrible, terrible border.
Did they find anything in your bag?
So the thing was to stop that man before he put his hand in your bag, because sometimes the hand was closed. It's such a strange situation. You're all naked and you took guns, and I remember I stopped him. He had nothing, but he was very angry. And after that, they kicked us out on the road, and it was beginning of the night. And we dare not walking to Afghanistan. We didn't know how many kilometers was there. So we just stay leaning on the wall of the Iranian police. And then police came out and said, "You're not allowed to touch an Iranian wall. You're no more in Iran now. Go." And it was middle of the night. I remember there was wild dogs barking. Maybe we were 20 people.
Oh, there's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Did people travel in groups?
Well, when you had to pass the border, it was much better. to take a bus.
Hmm.
Passing a border by yourself alone, you could have really big troubles. And so maybe we walk, I don't know, 100 meters, but everyone was afraid. And then a little bus arrived. We could see the light. This story is incredible. And they were Afghan people. So we were so happy, so we all went on the bus. and maybe the Afghan border was 10 kilometers away. So after, I don't know, a few kilometers, the driver stopped. There were 3 Afghan. The driver, the conductor was paying, and somebody on the roof was taking care of the luggage. So the driver stopped and said, now if you want to go on, you pay more. And, we didn't know what to do. And there was 2 men from Germany, pretty strong, and they were wearing black leather, and they were fighters. And they went to the driver, and they say, nobody's going to give you money. You go on, or we kick you out. And the driver took the key off and threw the key through the window in the desert. It was night. So we're like in a movie. And these 2 men, they put him out, they threw him out, they threw the conductor out. They went on the cables, they put the engine on, and they drove, and we went on. And at first everyone was very happy, and then we say, wait. What's going to happen when we reach there? And there is another one on the roof. So they turned back. They went back. And we found the 2 Afghan people were just moving on the road. They came back on the van, they drove us to the border. And when we arrived at the border was closed. It was maybe 10 at night. So the police said, okay, there is a room where you can stay. So we all went into that room. They locked us in. And during the night, I remember we could hear gun shooting. And in the morning, we passed at the authorities, and that was another world. In this country, in Afghanistan, in these days, everyone was smoking hashish. Everyone. So also the police and the custom officer. So the day before you could have been shot, hanged. And here they were all smoking, and you show your passport, and so the man take the stamp, and before stamping, he gives you something to smoke. You don't know. You don't know. You have changed. You've come to another world. And in this time there was a big movement of Europeans. They were all going to Kathmandu, and many of them were after drugs. Only hashish and I don't know how they call it, marijuana. And it was an extraordinary movement of people. Everyone was so happy. They had all left Europe, and life was very easygoing. They were at that time, India was so poor that there were free restaurants for poor people. So many of us, we were going there, and we spent very little, and renting a room was so cheap, and everyone was so happy. So that you have all this movement of people going to Asia and to India with a lot of happiness in their eyes, and It was really a beautiful period, extraordinarily beautiful. But I ended up in a monastery in Nepal.
But in Afghanistan, how was it in Afghanistan? You talk about it with like warmth.
Afghanistan was.
I mean, today when we think of Afghanistan, we think of some.
Today it's terrible.
Terrible, harsh country with difficult people. But maybe it's not like that. People were different, or still different.
I have students in Afghanistan and today, and as far as they can, they leave the country. What's going on there is horror. But in those days, it was a blessing. It was really, we felt like being in the land of God. Afghan people were so nice, so nice. They were so.
I met some Afghani people in Ukraine, which were moved back in the 70s when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and they always were so nice. But how was it back then in the 70s?
They were very religious, but very, very kindly religious, chanting, dancing, and very simple people. In the evening, every evening, there were music and dance. And in daytime, they were very, very silent people. They didn't speak much. We crossed Afghanistan on horses. And we stopped in what they call Chai Khana, tea house. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty cold. Afghanistan is a little high. And when we arrived in those Chai Khana, it was such a strange atmosphere. Nobody spoke. There was a big stove in the middle. They were all built the same way. And all around, maybe 1 meter higher, there was a kind of stage with low table, and people were sitting on the stage, on the floor. It was not the floor, it was a little higher. And you didn't order for anything. You just stay there and wait. And you were served tea, of course, and some bread, and sometimes there was a hot food, sometimes not. But nobody spoke. It was really, really something. Because you arrived from outside, which was very cold, and you arrived into the heat, and nobody was talking. And when you arrived, everything was looking at you. Everyone was looking at you. And they were so much full of weapons. Everyone. They had a gun, a revolver, sword, a knife, and I would say rifles. Mm-hmm. It was so strange. But very quiet.
Did you have experience of meeting these, tribes, Afghani tribes?
Well, there was only this. I mean, except in the cities, but there were only nomadic people. Mm-hmm. One day, we didn't know. We have been stopped by the Russian army. It was still a period of the Soviet. Mm-hmm. And there was a small battalion, and we were stopped by them, and they say, "What are you doing here? You are in USSR." But they were very kind. They took us back to Afghanistan, and we arrived to a tribe, a nomadic camp, and I don't know what they told to the tribe. So anyway, we stayed there, and something very strange happened. We were sitting there, and suddenly we had guns. And so suddenly one of the Afghans came, and so the gun was with cloth because it was very dusty. So he asked to see the gun. So we took the cloth off, and then all of them took the cloth off. So what's going to happen, you know? I had never shot in my life.
So you had a gun, but you never used it before.
It was something you must have at that time.
But that changes, you know, your spiritual path. If you know you're going somewhere with a gun, how does it change? You know, how did you perceive the situation?
We had to have it.
Mm-hmm.
It was the sign of a traveler who is safe. You know, there were many hippies going there, and Afghan people, they didn't really like them. They didn't understand. They thought all girls were prostitutes, and they didn't understand when they tried to go with them. And of course, the boys, the men, didn't agree. So there was some misunderstanding. But the moment you had a gun, you were respected. So we were with this tribe, so everyone was taking the cloth off their guns, and then one take a stone and put it, I don't know, 20 meters away, and it was going to be a competition. And as we were the guests, we were the first to shoot. We were, on that day we were 3, and I said, I've never shot them. No chance for me. And none of us had. So one shot and it touched the stone. So all Afghan put the cloth back on their girl. And we were the honored guest. So they brought food. We had the best pieces of food. And after that, I don't know if it was the chief of the group, of the tribe, I don't know, came to us and pointed to the friend who has broken the stone, and he called him. So we went and in a tent, and he came back after, I don't know, 3 minutes with 3 young ladies. And the chief said, they are for you for the night. That was Muslim country. So he had a good night. But we didn't have any, just listening to the wind.
So there were 3 Europeans, and all 3 girls went with the one who shot the stone. Okay.
I should have trained. I mean, and another one I remember. Oh, it was crazy. He lives very close to here now. We were on a truck, and you know the backside of the truck was totally flat, and the driver they were taking whoever asked. So there were some sheep also, and so we were on this truck, and a old man came on the truck with his young daughter, and the young daughter sat just in front of him, of this friend, and it was very cold, so he just stayed like that. And from time to time, his name was Robert, he was looking at the girl who was facing him, and maybe we went several hours, and when we stopped and we went down, the old man came to him, and explaining that he had looked at his daughter many, many times, so he had to marry her. And the stupid man said, okay. And we tell him, what are you doing? Oh, he said, well, it's an experience. And he stayed. And we met him again several years after. He escaped from the tribe, and I mean, he said it was a really difficult life, and he escaped. So it was such, I mean, it was really crazy thing to say yes. But we were crazy. And also, that's the meeting with ordinary people. But we also had quite meeting with extraordinary Sufi, I remember, in Mazar-e-Sharif, which is very north, close to the Russian border.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big tariqa, a group of Sufis, which, I don't know, I came in contact with. And I didn't know what spirituality was on this practical aspect. I had a lot of wish for it, but I didn't know that there was practices and there was teaching and there was something to learn. And for me, spirituality was kind of love affair with the infinite. And I've never been touched by images of the God in different religions. The first meeting on this trip was in Bulgaria, in Sofia. It was near Christmas, and we went into a church, and the church was under restoration, and there was a man. He was close to the ceiling on all those structures, lying on his back and painting, restoring the painting and chanting with those Orthodox chants.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was so moved, and we waited until he went down, and we took him to a restaurant. He was a simple painter, but he was touched by the religion. And so quite a few other meetings. So in this tariqa in Afghanistan, it was very, very touching for me, because it was the first encounter with the practice. They were chanting the name of Allah, what they call the zikr, but it went on all night long, with different breathing system and movement of the body. And you just go in kind of, some seems to go in ecstasy, but anyway, your mind is blown. And they were very, very, very kind. They didn't ask, he didn't ask anything, he didn't ask me, because I went alone. He didn't ask me to become Muslim. He didn't care. His idea was that what we call God is something universal. You don't have to apply to a particular religion. I have a student, Afghan student. She lives in Switzerland. She was from the king family. She was a little girl. And I don't remember who came into the palace and killed the whole family. And she kept herself hidden behind a curtain. And she still remembers that. She's a yoga teacher in Switzerland now. And some others that I know. But at that time, there was no problem. Life was so sweet in Afghanistan, so sweet. Here and also, I have met a group of Qawwali. They sing like crazy. And at that time also the Shah was in power, the king was in power. So there is a place where the man who wrote the Rubaiyat, Omar Khayyam, is buried. There is a tomb, and he was very revered. And there were Qawwali singing all the time, all around. But once again, for me, I was just overtaken by love, mainly. I believed in love at that time.
Did it change?
Yes, it has changed. It's a different type of love today. But at that time, I was very emotional. I was just thanking with a lot of emotions, looking at the sky and wherever. And those Qawwalis, they were so, it's ecstatic music. And I met some others in Pakistan, people who were, there's been a big lineage called the Chishti Sufi, where they sing a lot. And then later on, there was this so famous Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, who became a star. And when you listen to them chanting, you go in ecstasy. I mean, if you let go, it's so extraordinary. The happiness they have chanting the name of Allah.
Did you ever think to join the Sufis?
No, because I didn't believe in any organization of religion. In fact, today I understood what it was, but in those days I had no words. But it comes to, you cannot organize freedom. And for me, spirituality has to do with an extraordinary feeling of freedom. I'm not talking about freedom from social laws, but a feeling, a sensing of very strong freedom that doesn't depend on anything. Because all our social freedom, there is always a contract. You feel free, but you have to respect some rules, social rules. I don't know, in couples' life, family life, working life, social life. So on the road here, you feel free until you drive 80 kilometers an hour. If you drive quicker, you don't feel free anymore. You know you might be in trouble. But below that, so there is a law into which you feel free. But this is not the freedom I'm talking about. I'm talking about an inner state that is full of joy. And that doesn't depend on social laws. It's a state of complete freedom. So I couldn't already think about stepping into a movement. This is what I kind of discovered when I met my Nidra Yoga master. He was a wanderer, and I just happened to know a week ago that he passed away.
Yeah, I saw the post in Facebook.
And he was a wanderer, so a wandering yogi. So this is what spoke to me very deeply. It was possible to live a life of a wanderer and perceiving that intense love and happy love for the infinite. I don't know. I don't like to call it God.
Did you meet this teacher in the 70s or later?
Yeah, yeah. I met him by chance. It's a strange story. I studied with him 21 years, and he was a wandering yogi. So every time I was in India, not each and every time, but most of them, I met him.
Accidentally. Well.
One day I told him, I say, how is it that it works like that, you know? And he was the kind of person who hate questions, and he refused to answer most of the time. And I remember he said, why don't you trust? Just trust. Why do you ask? Why do you ask you we meet? You come, I am here, and that's it. And so there I started a sadhana, which I have no idea what it was. I remember this man was always sitting like this, looking in the infinite, and smoking bidi, smoking cigarette, all the time. And one day I asked him, I say, what is your practice? And he gave me a non-answer, which was, it's very simple. When I'm thirsty, I drink. When I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm sleepy, I sleep. I said, well, yeah, I know that story. Yeah. But what is your sadhana? He said, I do nothing. And then he said, don't you do nothing? I said, no. In my country, when it's time to eat, I eat. When it's time to sleep, I sleep. And we had a little discussion, and then he said, do you want to learn how to do nothing? So I said, yes. I said, okay, just lie down. So I lay down. It was in not the thick forest, but it was just not far from the city. But it was the beginning of the forest. So I lay down, and time went on. Maybe, I don't know, 1 hour, 2 hours. And I was kind of fed up. So I I sat, because he hadn't said a single word. So I sat back, and he said, I didn't tell you to sit down. You have to learn to do nothing. Lie down. So I dare not, I didn't know what to do. So I lay down, and then he started teaching. That was my first Nidra class. And what I really loved with this man is that he was totally free, completely free. I met some others, and I've been very close. I'm still close with somebody called Chandra Swami, who lived in silence for 33 years. But when I met him, he was speaking, and but he was into an order, Udasin order. Mm-hmm. Well, the first one also, Kashmiri Babu was also in Udasin order. But I remember when I met him first time, he said, I am from the Nat order. And I came to know that he was not. He was from Udasin. I don't know why he said so. And this quality of being and still here we say to follow a sadhana, but it is not about following, it's about committing. To commit into a quest, and even having a guru, a teacher, that's what I have loved in this yoga world, is that the guru, they gave me practices, always saying, don't trust too much, realize and see what it is. Don't believe too much. And that really spoke deeply to me, instead of following rules of a religion. So from the right beginning, maybe because I was influenced by this hippie movement, how do they call it? Peace and love, that was the name. But not following the society patterns.
How long were you in India when you first arrived?
Stayed about 1 year.
Oh, 1 year. Wow. So were you just traveling around India?
No, I wasn't traveling, I was studying. I didn't travel much.
So where did you go?
Well, we arrived from Pakistan, so we arrived in, where was it?
Was it Amritsar?
Amritsar, yeah. And
So this famous border crossing between Lahore and Amritsar.
And then from there we went to Kashmir. We were really tired of all those 6 months traveling. We thought having holidays. And from there we went to Dharamshala, where the spiritual trip started. Here again there are many strange stories that happen. I just wonder why I've gone through all this. I understand nothing. And
How was Dharamshala back then?
there were very few people. It was very Tibetan. There were many Tibetan refugees. It was very sweet because India is tough, but Tibetan, they really have a completely different atmosphere. It was very sweet. And the Dalai Lama was there, so the fact that he was there changed the whole behavior of people. Everyone was walking down the streets with a mala and chanting their mantra constantly. It was very sweet place, McLeod-Ganj.
Were there many Europeans back then there?
Yes, there were not many, but there were some, yeah. They had the Dalai Lama had opened a big library. He was trying to collect the texts, and some lamas had started classes. And there was a center called Tushita, which still exists today, and where Westerners were studying. You know, it was a huge change from what we lived here. Here life was so square-minded, so grey, so sad. You know, you went to school, then you find a girl, you got married, you have a job, you have children, and then you die. That was it. And everything was so strict. And on the road there was so much freedom. And Tibetan were very open. They were all refugees, so they knew what it was to be a foreigner. And also Indians were very open, not as much as Tibetan, but it was really a beautiful time. Life was so sweet, flowing. And we had music also. There was music in all the coffee shops. We were just living free. after leaving this Western Europe, we felt it like a jail. There was no future. I mean, future was already marked.
Do you think the Europe has changed from back in those days?
Yes, it changed. I think I say we because I felt, having taken part into this, I think yes, we have changed a little Europe, but it went back today. There was a period where everything opened in France, at least I remember that. But today it has narrowed again. It is more narrow than before. I'm so surprised today that young people, they follow the rules. I don't understand. Of course, many rules are totally useless and stupid. We don't need them. But they just follow the rules. I push them to rebellion. Not going on the street, but just to be more free. And I think we have been, at least I have been, influenced by this thought current when I arrived in Asia, in India. And you know, yogis, wandering yogis, not the swamis organized in ashram, and they are not so funny, this one. But the wandering yogis, they are very open and beautiful people. They are full of kindness. They're really taking care of others.
Back then, in the 70s, were there many Westerners in India, and many Westerners on the way to India. But if we would statistically, how many, like, who were the French is the biggest group out of these Westerners, or you mentioned New Zealand, Germany. How many? I mean, how would you describe the demographics of this movement to India?
I can't say precisely. There were many English people because they didn't need any visa. There were, at that time, there was still an agreement with India and Great Britain, so they didn't need a visa. They could sail. So I met quite a number who was settled down in India. But it's difficult to say.
Were there many French?
No.
Because I thought that the French tradition going to the West is an old one also. And I know that Alexandra David Noel's house is not far away from you, also, and she, was, as it's mentioned, as the first woman in Tibet.
Yeah, but in these days, the main reason for young people to leave was, they had this drop out, turn off, tune in from Alan Watts, I guess, or maybe it was Ram Dass. So, but many were really turning off the Western way of life. It was the main reason. And so there was this movement, Peace and Love, which was strong. So it was a real flock of people. But it was not thousands and thousands, but quite a number. And among this population, people who really get into spirituality was a very little percentage. I don't think it was more than 5%. And many were attracted by drugs also. I remember in Kathmandu in winter is a little cold. So I was living in a monastery a few kilometers from Kathmandu and was going from time to time in the city. And I remember those buses, they were called Magic Bus and Swiss Bus. They were going down from Kathmandu down to Goa for Christmas. So Goa was hot for Christmas. And I remember these buses leaving from the main square in Kathmandu is called Durbar Square. So at the end of the bus, the drivers have taken off, I don't know, maybe 2-3 rows of seats. So there was a platform with carpets, music. Music was Pink Floyd and Cat Stevens and the Doors. And then I remember these people stepping on in the bus, with beautiful, extraordinary, colorful cloth, flowers in the hair, and smoking. And then the bus was were leaving with there was kind of smoke smell, hashish all the way, with Pink Floyd, and we're just going down to Goa for having Christmas there, where Pink Floyd were coming or Rolling Stones were coming. That was that kind of population. There were not so many who were involved into spirituality as I perceive it today. But we all thought that was a spiritual life. And it was very, very kind, very kind. But drug had a big part of it in it. Soft drugs. Now there was a place in Kathmandu where there were already people taking heroin. That was a horror. Police would find from time to time in the morning one girl was dead. That was a terrible place. I ended up in that area because I had no more money at one moment and renting were very, very cheap. It was terrible. But that was just in a little street. All the rest was so happy.
Where else were you in India back then? Like Nepal, Kashmir? What else?
I was in the Himalayas. That's where I stayed the most. Studying. And then later on, I became very friend with Baul singers. Baul is a tradition that comes from West Bengal, the area near to Calcutta. And they are singers. They're deeply mystical people. And so I lived for quite a while in West Bengal. But that was not. This is not long time ago. My main place was in Himalayas.
How was it? Like the basic needs, like water, for example, in Afghanistan or in India, because nowadays you have bottled water everywhere, but back then, how was it?
It was really difficult. Really difficult.
How would you drink? Like if you want to drink and and your water is finished?
I didn't drink. I had only tea. And we drank. I remember now. We had some pills called hydroclonazone. Little pills that you put into 1 liter. You wait for an hour, and the taste is horrible. But most of the time it was tea. And when I was settled somewhere, just boiling the water.
Mhm.
But that was really difficult. That was something difficult. Anyway, the food was bad also.
Many people got sick.
Yeah. Indian too, many. That ended slowly, progressively when Indira Gandhi decided to put one television set into each village. And what you could see on the television were only documentaries about how to take care of a baby, how to cook, what to do with water. And that really, really reduced a lot death.
Mhm.
But every couple, they have had dead children. Every couple was a lot of death as a child. And that was really difficult. Because we never had cold water, was always warm.
So I have more questions about the Zinal and your connection to it. When did you first join the Congress, or when did you contacted anyone from the European Union of Yoga? How it was, when was it?
I think I started in 78, if I well remember. I was following a teacher training in Lyon, in France, and it was inside the Fédération Nationale des Enseignants de Yoga, which was a member of EUI. And at that time, EUI was mainly French. There was a woman in charge, her name was Claude Pelletier. And then came in Gérard Blitz. So Gérard Blitz was kind of manager to the Club Méditerranée. It was a big travel agency. And he was very attracted by spirituality. At one time, I remember he was the secretary of Krishnamurti. And also he was very close with many swamis. And having this position, he was opening different Club Méditerranées all over Europe. And he met many people who were into yoga. And he pushed in many countries for starting national federations. And at one time, he created the European Yoga Union. And there was a Club Méditerranée in Zinal. There was also another in Normandy in France, where we had many seminars. But in Zinal it became international. And because he knew many people, he was inviting many yogis from India. And it was quite a thing, because we were into this hotel of Club Méditerranée. It was very expensive. And I remember the first time I went, I stayed just one day and I slept outside. It was too expensive, I couldn't afford it. And so you have all these swamis, most of them are dead now. Satchitananda came, yogi from Madras, and those swami who became famous in the United States. And the audience, there were many women, as it is today, but they were all dressed, fancy clothes. It was really chic. It was really chic, and they were all these women were after the swamis and the yogis. And I remember they were all taking sunbaths, half naked, and the yogis were looking at that. Didn't understand what was going on. And I remember those tables full of food. It was a Club Méditerranée service. And a lot of flowers also. It has nothing to do with what it is today. It was very, very luxurious and chic.
So was this your first encounter with the...
I think it was in 80 maybe. I don't remember exactly. Because I couldn't afford it. I didn't have any money at that time. But I went 2 or 3 times, just staying one day and looking for a place to sleep. And after that, Gérard Blitz, he was very successful. He was used to managing big companies and a lot of people. And the secretary of the Club Méditerranée was paying the expenses of the EUI. And that's why when he died, there was a huge debt and was a lot of money to pay because when he left, the people from the Club Méditerranée, I suppose they check the accounts and they say, well, we have spent so much money for this European Union of Yoga, you have to pay us back. It was a tough time. But the atmosphere, the ambience was nothing to do with what it is today. And it changed over time. And the idea was to stay in Zinal. Nobody really wanted to go somewhere else. And even today, the question is still there because it's very expensive. Swiss francs is very high. But we have never been able to move because there was a kind of attachment to that place, which is, it's a very beautiful place. So that was Zinal in the 80s.
How did it change over time?
Well, once again, when the EUI started renting all those little places that we have today, they are not luxurious at all as the place was before, because whole activities happened inside the hotel of Club Méditerranée. There was nothing all around. So once again, it was very, very nice. And the building, the rooms. So when it was moved to all those little places we are renting today, they're very ordinary places. And then the people who used to come stopped coming because it was not nice enough for them. Mm-hmm. There were quite many were very well-off people. I remember at that time, it was very, very French. There was one very famous teacher, Neil Houtoff. And he was asking enormous amount of money. And I remember him was coming with this sport car. It was really another time. And his girlfriend was a dancer, so I remember them was jumping out of the car. And, it was really fancy. So all these people who were following such teachers, they stopped coming because there was the chic has gone.
Any teachers who you really did influence you? What were there in Zinal? Some swamis or some teachers, who were doing classes, and it was either big teachers or big teachers who really influenced you, or made the change in the time flow of Zinal?
Gerard Blitz invited very unusual yogis. There was one who became quite well known after. They called it the silent yogi of Madras. He didn't speak, I forgot his name. And he loved to do pujas. But when he was doing pujas, it was terrible. He was putting things everywhere. So the last time, I think they call it yogi from Madras. And this year there is this man coming from Italy, Walter Mutra. He is one of his students. And this yogi, he didn't speak. He had long hair. He was an extraordinary Hatha yogi. I think it's the most extraordinary person I have seen doing asanas.
What did made an effect?
He was silent. He didn't say anything, and he could take very tough asanas, and just as if he played like a little child. He had very long hair. I remember he was walking on his hair, and I remember one day he was showing cleansing of the nostrils with milk. So he had brought these little boxes in cardboard of milk. No, he has very big nostrils. So he cut the big, and it is 1 liter about. So he put it just in front of his nose, or below his nostril, and we saw the milk coming. 1 liter. And then same thing with the other nostril. And then he didn't speak, so he made us understood there were many, many pieces of milk. You do the same now. That's how he taught. And it was really funny. And so he loved to do pujas. But when he was doing pujas, it was such a bazaar everywhere. He put so many things. And pujas were very long. And I remember about maybe 10 years ago, I was in Zinal and I went to the main hotel where we have our General Assembly, and the man recognized me, and he came to me and he said, "Is this the yogi? Is he still coming, or will not come this year?" Because he used to do the puja in his main hall, and they took hours for cleaning after. So that's the kind of people Gerard Blitz invited, and it was very, very funny. I laughed a lot, but the restaurant owner, they didn't laugh at all.
Which Zinal would you point out of all Zinals that you were at?
I can't say. I don't remember well enough. Because on the first session, once again, I couldn't afford it. I couldn't come. So I don't know.
When did you teach first time in Zinal?
About 25 years ago.
What did you teach, or what was the topic of Zinal that year?
I don't remember. I was very wild, I'm still a little, but at that time I was much, much wilder. So,
what do you mean by wilder?
I didn't care about who was doing what, and I was doing my thing, and that was over. I really didn't follow anyone, because what I had been taught was, if you want to study deeply, just stay into only one way. Don't go trying this and that and that. And I obeyed, so I didn't go. And I remember Krishnamurti also once said, if you really want to study, don't read anything, only novels. And I did it, so I didn't read for 30 years maybe. Only novels and texts. I still do the same, in fact, I don't read.
But you do have many books in your library.
Yeah.
How come?
I have, at one time I was organizing big conference in Paris, really big one. We have 30 to 40,000 people coming. So I was in contact with many publishers, and I asked them to send me books, because I was inviting people to give lecture. And then I kept all the books. There was many which was totally no interest. And when I moved here, everything was in boxes, and there were many boxes, and I didn't want to take them out. And one day, Evelyn again came here and she said, I will take all your book out. And she put all the books here, all along, because they have been in boxes for, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years maybe. Then I have these shelves made by a carpenter in the village. And they are still not classified. A student came here, it was his job, he said, I will classify them, and they never did it. But it's very helpful for students when they have to do their memoirs. There is a large choice. Mm-hmm. So there are some old texts which are not easy to find, and then there are many useless books.
What was your first impression when you came to Zinal? I mean, the valley, or what do you remember the most? But I mean the first impression. So just you arrived from the bus, or somebody drove you and you saw it. What?
Nothing much. I remember Himalayas where you are 4,000 meters high, and you still look like that at the mountains. It's so high. So for me, it was just mountains. But what I remember that really struck me was the people who were into this meeting, these fancy women with extraordinary dresses, and I was really shocked. At that time, I didn't have much cloth. I was really poor for a long time. I was poor, so I had 2 or 3 pants and shirts, and very ordinary. I have them made in India. I still do that. I still have my cloth made in India, and so I could see this woman with so fancy cloth, and I didn't understand what was going on. I was quite reluctant.
Was it? Did the aesthetics of a yoga congress changed over time? I mean, the modern women. I mean, the yoginis. It's pretty much you would expect some certain clothes for.
Today they do, but at that time, no. They were not yoginis; they were bourgeois women. They were all after the yoga teachers. There were so many love affairs constantly. There was no aid at that time. It didn't exist. We were dreaming about a tantric relationship. It was nothing to do with today. It was a good time.
Okay.
And then, they were dancing tango and, really bourgeois women. And then we had people like, once again, this Nila Utov, who was so chic, It was really fancy moment.
With this love and peace attitude back in the 70s, how did you have like, and you were doing your spiritual, you said you were studying in the Himalayas, did you have any woman friend?
No.
What do you think? How can
I met one, as I told you, when we crossed Pakistan. We met these two sisters from New Zealand who asked us to travel together because they were afraid, and they were right, because we went through big trouble in the bus at night. And so later on, I had a love story with one of these two girls. But among the hippie people, couples were changing all the time. It was the regular way to live.
Was it in the air, or was it said, or was it discussed, or it was some natural movement?
It was a natural movement. It was very natural. It was that started from California, which was a big revolution in the United States when it happened, because adults, they were just wondering what's going on with our kids. And then the flow came to England and then Europe and went to Asia. It was very easy going. You felt, how do you say, close or intimate with a woman or a man. You could have a night together, and the day after everyone was going his way. But there were still some couples who were traveling together. But it was really, how do they call it? Free love?
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't into this. I was really after finding something, a state of love that I would not depend on a relationship. But still I met that New Zealand girl. And then they went on. They were going back to New Zealand. They were coming from England, if I well remember. And then they went on, and I went to the monastery. And there was no nuns in the monastery.
And when did the airplanes start to be a part of this movement to the east? Like, when you explain your stories, it seems like there are no planes at all. When was
there were planes, but nobody took them.
Why?
I mean, maybe some people took them. I don't know, because the road was the way. The idea was not to reach. Well, Kathmandu has a particular aura, but the road was the way. Being on the road was extraordinary. Last winter, we were in Istanbul for maybe a week, a few days, and just by chance, I found the cafe where we all met in the 70s. And we went into that cafe, and I talked with the owner, and the owner said, "Oh, but it was not me, it was my father, and here he is." So the father was sitting in the coffee shop. I don't remember the name of it. Anyway, cake shop, something like that. And I talked with the owner, who was Turkish, and he remembered that period. He was so happy to talk with somebody who and so some people were going by car. Maybe some were flying, I don't know. But I don't think many would have gone by flight.
And when was your first time when you went to India by plane?
The first time is I came back by plane.
Ah, so it wasn't.
Because
Was it a direct flight to France?
I think yes. In fact, I stayed in a monastery in Nepal, and slowly I became very, very weak, very, very weak. And I couldn't stay in the monastery anymore, I was too weak. I had to find a doctor. And, oh yeah, there's a nice story about this again. I left the monastery, it was on the top of a hill, and I was so weak that from time to time I was fainting. And I had to take a bus down up to Kathmandu, and I fainted on the little path, and I fainted in a small ditch. And somebody woke me up. He was a man who had no legs. He was in the little cart, and he was with the 4 wheels, and he was pushing.
Mm-hmm.
And he woke me up and said, "Come." I said, well, he asked me. I said, "Well, I'm going to the bus station." He said, "Come, I'll take you." So I arrived at the bus station, went to Kathmandu. The story is very long. Anyway, I was so weak, and I went to a Ayurvedic doctor, and he said, "You have nothing, you're just weak." But I couldn't stand, I couldn't stay like that. And I had not enough money to fly back. So I went to the French consulate, and I asked if they would agree to give me money or to pay partly my ticket. And the consul asked me, "How much do you have?" And I remember it was 600 francs. Oh, he said, "You can have a ticket with this." So I said, I went in several agencies and I don't have. So he called some agencies and he said, "Okay, I have a ticket for you. You go there and you have it."
Mm-hmm.
So from Kathmandu I flew to Delhi, and from Delhi I took a night flight to Paris.
How was France after you spent a year in Asia?
It was still the same horror. But
has it changed at all, or your perception of it?
No. But when I arrived, oh yeah, I remember. I knew a French couple in Kathmandu, and the man said, "Can you go to my mother and tell her I am okay?" Because once again, when you were sending letters, it took a month. And I was going to fly, so it would take 2 days. And the girl said, I bought, I don't remember what it was, a present for my mother also, can you bring it to her? So when I arrived in Paris, and I took the metro, and in the metro I remember I fainted again. I had a big, heavy backpack. And when people went out, I fell down. And then I went to this man's mother, but her house was no more. There was, I don't know, the number was 26, I don't know. So there was no more 26. There were 20, 24 and 28, no 26. So I went to a bar and I asked about 26. They say, oh, it's been destroyed. And then I went to the mother of the girl. She was a very bourgeois woman. She was extraordinarily welcoming. I rang and I heard from the other side say, who are you? What do you want? And I say, I come from Nepal. I have a parcel for you from your daughter. So she opened and she was so kind. She gave me food and tea and I knew after, on the spot, I wasn't aware that I was stinking. But she was very kind, very, very kind.
When did you start teaching?
Oh, a long time ago.
But how far from the time when you came back from India?
Almost 20 years.
How did you decide to teach?
Just friends. Friends realize that I have changed, and they, at one time they asked if you could teach us something, and in my mind teaching was, I thought for teaching you have to be illuminated or realized, so there was no way. But they insisted and insisted, and so I started. Then there was very few teachers in those days, and so the news spread, and some people I didn't know were coming, and it was free. It was on donation, and there were more and more people coming, and I had a little job. I was painting. How do you call that? In big residences, you know, on the balcony you have this little grill.
Hmm?
So I had a contract for painting 2.5 kilometers of them with a friend who has a paint company. And so one day there were more and more people coming to teach, and so one day I told them, I say, I am in trouble with this situation because I'm working every day and I cannot free more hours, and I still have to work for paying the bills. And they say, well, you know, we are also uneasy with the way you do because you don't ask anything. So we give what we want, but it is not easy for us. So why don't you fix a price? So that was very strange for me, to sell the teaching I had received for free. And so I asked them, how much should it be? And then it was an amount big enough so that I could stop painting. And that's how I stopped. And at times it was difficult, I didn't have enough, but I really live very, very... I remember I had two pants and 2 shirts only. And it went on for a long time like that. And then I realized that there were a few number of people who really wanted to study, who were looking for a deep meaning of life. And that has kind of changed the quality of the people who came until now it's about maybe 20 years ago. Chandra Swami once said, I say, it's time for you to start teaching now. I said, well, I've been doing that for years. He said, no, now it starts. And I know that he meant that I should not try to find students. I should not charge. I should say yes to every demand. So I came back and I stopped everything. And it lasted 4 months until somebody called me. It was Evelyn from Switzerland. She was Evelyn. And I was starting worrying because after 4 months I had no income. And when it started with her, up to now it has never stopped. And one day I went back to Chandra Swami and I told him, I said, look, getting tired, I'm always on the road. And he said, okay, build a house, people will come. And I said, I have no money. He said, I have money, look for a place. So I came back again and my parents died. And I inherited a little more than 100,000 euros. And I talked to a couple of students telling them I have to find a place, and they said, look, if you want, we take care of this. We have been restoring houses all our life. So they found places, and for me, becoming the owner was, it was above my possibility. I always said no. And one day they found a place and they said, look, we don't understand, you always say no. If you say no to this one, we stop. So I say yes.
Did you see it before you said yes, or you just said yes?
I came, it was here, and it was so ugly. I will show you, I have some photos upstairs. But they say it's the last one, and I was totally unable to find a place and to restore it. So I said them yes. And they made this beauty.
This is a very beautiful house.
And I show you the photo. There were only the 4 walls and the tiles. And gardens were garbage. And then, but it took a long time. But something strange happened because I remember when I bought the place, came out of the notary, I have 80 euros left on my account. I have no money for starting the work. And something very strange happened. Evelyn organized a gathering where there were many people, 30, 40. In Switzerland, the level of economic level is high. And the same thing happened in Luxembourg, where one day a couple came to a session, and they were touched by the Nidra. Then they came to 1 week in summer, and after this 1 week, the man called Frederick, maybe 10 days after, called me, and he said, there's something strange. I'm no more clamping. He said, I've been clamping for years and years, And suddenly my wife in the morning said, you don't jump anymore. So he was sure it was from this Nidra, which was very strange because the reason was that one of his legs was shorter than the other one. So he also said, I see that you're not good for organizing anything. I am American and I'm very good. And he organized it. So there were seminars in Switzerland and Luxembourg with many people, and prices were high compared to the French level. And it went on like that for several years. So it was very strange because every Sunday they give me sometimes 2,000, 4,000, 5,000 euros. Every Sunday I was so rich. And it was really strange. If I had been given, let's say, 3,000, when I was coming here and I asked them how much expense do you need, and so if I had 3,000, they would say it's 2,950. So every Sunday was rich, every Monday I had nothing. And it went on like that for almost 5 years. And then that was built.
Did you manage to see Deshikachar in those days?
Yeah, once, but I went to him in Chennai.
Ah, okay. So you went to India.
Yeah. And his father was still alive at that time, but I never met him. I never went. Krishnamacharya.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very simple. It's a strange, not strange, that's how it is. Krishnamurti.
Did you meet Krishnamurti in person?
Yeah, no, quite a few times. He invited me to teach in his schools. And so Krishnamurti was practicing asana every day.
Really?
And he stopped learning with Iyengar. And he was suffering from, I think it was his neck, if I well remember. And one day he went to Krishnamacharya, who was his neighbor. In Chennai, the Krishnamurti Foundation and the center that Desikachar started are 10-15 minutes walk. So Krishnamurti went to Krishnamacharya and told him, said, I would like to study asana with you. And Krishnamacharya said, no, I will send you my son, Desikachar. So Desikachar came and he was very impressed because he was young. Krishnamurti was much older, and Krishnamurti he has a huge reputation. And he said, when I arrived, he was a perfect student. He had cleaned the floor, he had put my mat for Desikachar, he has put his mat, he was waiting, standing, and when Desikachar came, he saluted, and Desikachar was very, very impressed. And his father had told him, you will tell Krishnamurti to show you what he does. So that's what Desikachar told Krishnamurti, said, show me what practice you have. And then Desikachar reported to Krishnamacharya, and apparently Krishnamacharya just when he had met Krishnamurti for, I don't know, 1 hour maybe or 10 minutes, probably he had perceived what would be better and what to avoid physically. So he told Desikachar, he said, okay, you're going to tell him that he has to stop what he does, and you will teach him this and that, and there's a few asanas. So next session, Desikachar told Krishnamurti, say, you have to stop what you do. And Krishnamurti stopped immediately. He never did it again. And so Desikachar became his asana teacher. But behind him was Krishnamacharya, and Desikasha was reporting all the time, and Krishnamacharya was changing the practices. So, and whole Spain went away, Krishnamurti Spain. So, do
you know why he had the pain in the neck?
Because of the practice of Iyengar.
Ah, okay.
He didn't suit it. I think he was doing long headstand, Sirsasana position. I don't remember in detail. So Krishnamurti used to invite Iyengar to Sanen, because every year Krishnamurti was lecturing in Sanen. So he invited Iyengar to stay with him in his chalet. And so that year he also invited Desikasha. And well, there was a clash, there was a trouble, because Desikasha arrived it first, so Krishnamurti gave him a room, and then Iyengar arrived 1 or 2 days or 3 days after. So he gave a room to Iyengar, but the room was below the room of Desikasha, and he couldn't stand it.
Where was it? In Chennai?
No, it was in Sanen in Switzerland.
Okay.
And then Krishnamurti introduced Desikasha to all the people who were there, and that's how he became known. After that, he became known.
And where did you meet Krishnamurti?
I met him for the first time in Sanen, also, Switzerland. It was, there were around in between 2,000 to 3,000 people. And he was giving a lecture, lecturing once every 2 days. And the first time I listened to him, I was really mind blown. And I didn't really listen. There was a kind of strength coming from this man, and I was totally silent. And after leaving, there was a big tent. I went into a field and I started crying like crazy. And I had the feeling of having met the Christ. It was such a strong sensation. Then the next day he wasn't talking, then the day after he was. And I arrived nearby the tent, and a tall Indian man, Raman is his name, came to me and said, "You're teaching yoga?" So I say yes. And he say, "Krishnamurti invites you to come and teach in his school." And how? Why? How was it possible? And I did it.
What do you mean in his school? In Switzerland or?
No, there was no school in Switzerland. There is one school in England, that's where I went, in Brockwood Park. There's another one in Ojai in California. And there are 5 or 6 in India. We tried to open a school in France. We failed, we couldn't. We've never been successful. Schools for children.
How often was Krishnamurti in India, Europe, California? Was he always like moving?
Yeah, he was touring all the time. So he had he stayed, he was in Switzerland for 3 weeks, maybe he stayed longer. I mean, publicly was there for 3 weeks. Then from there was going to the school in England, from there to California, and from there to India. Sometimes he was going to Australia or South America. He traveled all over the world all his life. He never stopped. Never stopped. He always said, well, not publicly, but privately, was said that if he would stop talking, sometimes he would say teaching, he would die. And the last talk he gave was in Chennai, in Madras. So it's as usual. And at the end of the talk, you can hear, said, it ends. Then he flew to United States, and he was admitted in a hospital, and he died a few months after.
How long did you teach in his school?
I never stayed long. So I taught in Brockwood in England a few times. I never stayed long. Then also in Rishi Valley, which is not very far from Madras, from Chennai, and also in Rajghat School in Benares. Probably next year I will go teaching in Bangalore School. Because after he died, there was an annual International Krishnamurti meeting in Switzerland. And I went there years and years. We were just watching videos, and I've had what they call dialogue, take a theme, and I was teaching every day. And that was about 10 years ago, because the organizer changed, and the new organizer wanted to have new people. And we went again this year, in last July.
And what do you teach? Is for children?
No, this is for adults.
For adults. So do your...
I taught asana there.
Uh-huh.
And Nidra also. But it is not the main point. The main point is Krishnamurti videos and what they call dialogue group discussions. And it is like...
How was it conducted? He gave lectures, as you said, every 2 days. And was there like a personal connection or dialogues with the students, or were they?
So you have to make a difference in between the schools with the children, and then the public talk for adults.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was at the school, he had a meeting with the whole staff and children every day. Every morning they had a meeting. And when there was any kind of problem, they used to go to him, and they all say the same. They say, we were explaining to him the problem, and he was pushing us to find a solution. We never found a solution, but when we left the room, the situation was over. He was a strange character. And then in the public talks, once again, there was many people. In Switzerland, maybe 3,000, and in India also.
Yeah, I've seen only the recordings, and it's usually many people.
Yeah. So he was lecturing once every 2 days, maybe 5 or 6 sessions, and then there was question and answers. Questions were written.
Mm-hmm.
Then apart from this, I came to know later that he was receiving around 30 people every day for lunch. He was inviting. And then he had many private meeting with people, many. When in Zinal, if you can talk with Ravi Ravindra, he was very close to him. And he has been, he was invited all the time. And I remember talking with the cook of the Ojai Krishnamurti Center. Ojai is in California. And the cook said, every day I have to cook for 30, 40 people. And so they were having many for lunch, and after lunch there was endless discussions with them. But that was private. What we know from him is public talks, because they are recorded. There are some private dialogue have been recorded.
Did he share any personal thoughts about his studying? With the story with Annie Besant and
Never.
Please explain or tell the stories you were telling me about you teaching yoga in Romania, back in the Soviet times, and Cuba also.
Yes.
Because in Ukraine, I have written a couple of articles and studied, the history of yoga in the Soviet Union, and yoga was not always allowed, or mostly it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be great to hear more stories about, the yoga in the Soviet bloc.
Yeah, so that goes back in the 70s also. So traveling in Romania, in those days many Romanians were talking French. So one day in a city called Târgu Mureș, we were traveling with a woman. We were talking on the street, and one man came, hearing that we were talking French, and he went and talked French with us. And he was an old man. He was no more working because he had a diabetes. And we became friends. And after a few days, one day he said, I also do some asana. I have a little book, but it is forbidden here. It was not strictly forbidden, but it wasn't really easy. And then he said, would you agree coming, teaching us? I will make a little group. My neighbor, she has a room that is empty in her house, so maybe we can have a class. So he organized it, and I went in the evening, and we started, and maybe 10 minutes after, somebody was banging on the door strongly. So the lady opened, and it was the police. They call it, in Romania, they call it the securitate. And they arrived there, and they say, what is this? And then they came to me and say, what are you doing here? And they were really tough. I wasn't really in trouble, but they kicked me out of the house. And so I left. I didn't wait on the street. I just left the place. Then I came to know the days after that the lady who was living in this house, they have taken her. Nobody knew where, and she hadn't show up again. And this man who had invited me, his name was Andrei Orban. He was very, very poor. I remember sending him parcels. And when I left Romania, and after a few days, he came to me and he said, I am in trouble with my son. Tigru is in Transylvania, which is near to Hungary. And he said, my son is very much against the political power. So he had put some messages in bottles in a river that goes to Hungary. And the messages were for the person in charge of Hungary, don't know if it was a king or a president, saying, we are in difficulty, please. We were before in Hungary, now we are from Romania. Take Hungary back. And he was caught, putting those bottles in the river. And he was put in jail. He was married, and they had a little child, a girl. So the Sandre said, I have to ask you something. It's very easy in Romania to divorce, especially because my son is in jail. Please marry my daughter-in-law. Take her to France with her daughter. Save them. And I said, well, no, I can't. I don't want to do this. But it was such a strange demand. And then I left, and I was sending him parcels. He loved to read a newspaper. In France, there is a big paper called Le Monde that we could find in Romania in those times, but there was 5 or 6 pages, and it's a huge, very, very thick newspaper. So I was sending him copies of Le Monde, plus some food and some books, and some clothes for his granddaughter. Until one day, he wrote me a letter and said, stop sending parcels. I'm always called to the police, and more they take everything. I don't receive anything.
Yes, what I wanted to ask, if you send the papers, usually the papers are, not allowed, weren't allowed back then.
I remember I was sending jams, some canned food, and he said they take everything. Or if I want to keep it, they ask me money. And so I stopped sending parcels. And one day I received a letter from him. He said, I'm coming to France. I had a sister, she passed away, and I have to go to France for official papers. So I went to Paris visiting him. We had a meeting in a train station. And he recognized me, but I didn't recognize him. He was really in a pitiful state. I thought he was a beggar. So he made his official papers and took a train back to Romania, and he never reached Romania. He had inherited of an apartment of his sister in Paris. He never arrived in Romania, and since that, no news.
How do you see like the students from the post-Soviet countries? Are they different? What is the difference? For example, if you compare them with the French students,
they are very, very determined practitioner. It's amazing. It's really amazing how they are determined. I've never seen that, even in India too. They practice. It's extraordinary the way they practice, so intensively. I remember in Bulgaria, there have been these two asana teachers, as I call them, which I don't appreciate much, as Iyengar and Patabi Joyce. And in India, they have organized asana competitions. And slowly it spread all over the world until there were, sometimes, I suppose it still exists, championship. And I remember one championship in Denmark, I was part of the judges. And I was giving very bad notes to everyone until they asked me, why do you do this? So I said, because I think that for participating to a competition, you must be very bad. Anyway, the champion was from Bulgaria. And one of the competition was the longest you stay in an asana. And one was headstand. And he stayed 3.5 hours. So the judge was sleeping. Audience have left. He was just alone. And then he was the champion. And then I met him again in another meeting in Portugal. And I talked with him. And I asked him, I said, how do you manage for staying so long time? He said, well, this is what is written in Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Stay 3 hours, so I just stay 3 hours. I have another friend, Vladimir Ryapolov. And his father was, maybe he's still alive, I don't know, a shaman. And he was very much into yoga, which was forbidden. And he explained me that books of yoga were flowing, but very hidden. And when the Soviet system collapsed, he said we suddenly saw thousands and thousands of people practicing yoga. And he was very much attracted with Krishnamurti teachings, and he translated a book of Krishnamurti called The Revolution of Silence, or The Silent Revolution, I don't remember in English. And he said he sold 1 million of them within a few months. So, from what he told me and from what I also perceived, people were so eager to learn. And yoga spread very quickly. And once they're still practicing quite tightly in some areas. I saw it reducing. I saw the intensity reducing by years, but it is still there. And I suppose it is the same in Ukraine. I don't know.
You have to go after the war finishes.
Yeah, we had planned having a
we should have
General
a
Assembly in Kiev.
Yeah, General Assembly in Kiev and Kharkiv. And actually, thank you so much for, you were one of the first teachers who responded in the first days of war, helping Ukrainians, to have a place for accommodation and home, and between your students also. And I know personally a couple of students who were staying with your students. So thank you from the Ukrainians. And I must ask you about what is your attitude towards this war and the aggression of Russia?
I found this is totally stupid. For me, when you decided to fight it first, unless you're very emotional, but still, it always starts in the thought, in the mind. And It's only out of stupidity and lack of intelligence. Whatever war is just a lack of intelligence. It's only ignorant people. They make war. Only ignorant. I mean people who are not aware at all of the unity of consciousness, that there is only one consciousness, there's only one mankind, there's nothing to win, there's nothing to lose. This is really the outcome of ignorance, complete ignorance. They're really ignorant people. They don't take any lesson from history. But they are not, I think they are really not able to learn. I think you really must be a very low mind level. It's really for blind people. Building borders is the same thing. It means bringing division, separation. That helps to bring nationalism. And it is only about belief that this psychological pattern of belief stops awareness of seeing the reality. What are you going to win? Land? People? So what? After people who are in power in countries, they always have 40, 50, 60 years old. So they just have a few more years to live, and so what? For me, this is just the outcome of laziness to learn, ignorance, and stupidity, because it is so obvious. It's so obvious. I remember when I was at school, that's the only thing you learn at school. You have to learn when France fought against Spain or against the Scottish, and who won the war, who lost it. And the exam is as stupid as this. You just have to repeat the same thing that what the teacher said. All this is so... It's totally ridiculous. It's really done for people who don't know how to use their thinking. I mean, we have this thought which is a jewel. We are the only species on this planet to be able to think sanely, and instead of that, we just have so stupid ideas which are totally meaningless, and they don't interest anyone. Nobody's interested. Well, very few people. It's so strange. It's so strange. I remember teaching in Finland before the COVID, and on the main square of Helsinki, there was a Finnish army showing the machine, and they had this huge, I don't know how you call that in English, this huge machine gun. They're so big, it's as big as the house. It's incredible how big it is. And what goes with this, and they have a long gun. I don't know the name in English. And so Finnish people were coming to the soldiers and asked, what is the speed of it? How much does it consume in petrol? And I was puzzled. So I went to the soldier and said, how many people can you kill in one shot? Because that's what it is done for. And he was shocked. He said, why do you put questions? He said, well, this is what it is made for. So how many people can you kill in one shot? And it's very strange because they're thinking about how many kilometers they can do when the tank is full. And this is totally crazy. People don't realize that what they have in their hands is for destroying mankind or others. I'm very sorry of having this nationality.
You mean French?
Yeah. But the thing is, if I change, I will have another one, so it doesn't change much. But because I really think it develops nationalism. Very often when traveling, this is the first question people ask.
Yeah.
The other day, again in Romania, somebody come and we were having tea, and one man came and said, where are you from? I said, well, we are all from the same, you know, we're all coming from our mothers. Aren't you? I said, yes, but which country? He said, what's the matter? What do you ask? What does it mean? Because the moment you say you're French, then they say, okay, you are such and such and such. Ideas. I was quite close with one of the director of the school in England. His name is Scott Forbes. And 5 or 6 years ago, he sent me a message saying, I have written a diary for the 6th last month of Krishnamurti's life because I was with him every day. And he sent me this book. And then, maybe 1 or 2 years after, he said his secretary, she was Mary Zimbalist, she was the widow of Hollywood movie producer. And she kept a diary for 20 years or something, and it was published by the same man, by Scott Forbes. And he sent me, and there was absolutely nothing normal in Krishnamurti's life. And before that, I was once in Pondicherry, and I found a book from his biographer, was a lady called Mary Lutens. So she had written 3 books about Krishnamurti's life. And the publisher told him, 3 books, we don't sell them. Could you make a 4th one where you put everything together, plus some new information? So I found this book by chance in Pondicherry, and I brought it, and I went to a French publisher, and I say, this should be translated into French, and I translated it. And while translating it, had some difficulties with the meaning of the words. So one day I phoned Mary Lutens, who was the biographer. She lives in London, and I went to her. And I went with a friend who was much better in English than I am. And we stayed a whole day. And she told us incredible stories. He was really, really, really a very strange person.
Maybe an example of a strange story.
He sounded like an alien. It was so... All his life, which is well known now, there's nothing normal. He had asked Mary Lutens he made a strange demand to her. He said, look, I cannot find who I am. Can you make a research? And if you find, I will be able to confirm. And she knew him from her childhood. She was 5 or 6 years old and he was 20 or something. So she started doing researches about his life. And it's very, very detailed. Everything is strange. Everything. And she told me a story when we went to her house. She said, Krishnamurti has told me that I could visit him anytime if I needed some information. So she said one day I went, so she was living in London, she went to Brockwood School, which is south of England, so maybe 2 or 3 hours drive. So she went there and they had a talk. And during the talk, suddenly Krishnamurti stopped and say, do you feel? He is here. He was always, from time to time at least, referring to something he called the Adonis. And she said there was a throbbing in the room. And that word, I didn't know what it meant. So that's one of the reasons I visited her. So she explained me the story. So she said there was a throbbing in the room, but nothing more. Then the discussion went on, and then they stopped. Krishnamurti went back into his room, and she went back to her car. And arriving in her car, she realized she had forgotten her coat. So she came back in the room for taking her coat, and she said a force lifted me up and crushed me on the wall. She said I was 20 centimeters stuck on the wall. And she said, can you imagine this man is living with this day by day? What is it? And he had never wanted to say anything about all this. He seemed to have lived with an extraordinary power. Sometimes he used to say, sometimes he said there is an extraordinary energy. You have no idea what it is, but he never explained. And quite many people who were close to him, they went to a strange situation. I had a funny story with him once. It was in Switzerland. I wanted a private talk with him. So I knew where he was staying, so I went knocking at the door, and a woman opened. She was Vanda Scaravelli, who became a very famous yoga teacher, and the chalet belonged to her. And she said, "You cannot. Nobody can see him. He doesn't receive anyone." So I left, took my car, went down, and on the way down, it's not possible. So I went up again. And I dare not knocking at the door, so I was stuck on the street. I didn't know what to do. And there was a very little window, probably the window of bathroom or toilets, that suddenly opened, and he was there. And I said, hello. And then he closed the door. And a few days after, I wanted to meet him. So I went again to the same chalet, same house. And I knew he was going for a walk every day by 5 or 6. So I waited. And at one time, he passed on, I think it was on the left side of a big, big rock. So I thought, okay, I pass on the other side of the rock, and then I will meet him as by chance. And so I did. I never saw him. He disappeared. It was impossible to grasp. Another time, that was in England, I wanted to invite him to lecture in France, in Paris. So after he had finished his lecture, there was a big marquee, a big tent where we all have like a buffet. And he came there, he was there. And so I went to him, and it was impossible. As soon as I was 3 meters from him, he would go the other way. And that happened, I don't know how many times. And I was wondering, I said, what's going on? And then I said, well, I really have a personal interest also doing this. So maybe I should put this aside. And so I went to him again, just with this in mind, for inviting him to Paris. And I could talk to him. And I told him, I said, sir, I'd like to invite you to Paris to lecture. He answered in French, he said, en France, ça n'est pas possible. It is not possible.
Why?
He had troubles with French television.
Okay. What kind of problems?
I don't know exactly. I don't know. He didn't want to talk anymore in France. There is a very funny interview with a journalist called André Voisin. You know, this is in the 50 or 60, I don't know. So the way journalists were putting questions had nothing to do with today. It was very formal. And so the lecture goes on for about, the interview goes on for about, I don't know, 40 minutes, 1 hour. And at the end, the journalist was really puzzled, and it was in French. And then he said, do you mean you are not alive? And Krishnamurti said, yes. And the journalist couldn't put any other question. And then when the funny music come in with, you know, da 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 da, it was Krishnamurti in the radio of Paris. So many spaceships has been launched very far now in space. They have never seen any bearded man. And so many people believe in ideologies. And we all know what the outcome of it. It's always...
How is, like nowadays, you know, having this 60 years of experience of yoga and many years of teaching, what do you think, you know, what's the next stage of yogic development that will be? I mean, where should the yoga move, or what it should include, or should it not change? And, you know, what do you think about that?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult to figure out what could be the future of yoga. I've been fighting for quite a while now for using clear words, and, for example, stopping to call people who teach asana, to stop calling them yoga teachers, They are Hasana teachers. Same with the training. We should stop. I mean, we had a big argument at the European Union for Yoga for this, because I was asking this, and they all say, you're crazy. But that's what it is about. So I was very surprised when teaching in China or in India or North Africa, South America, Europe, Australia also, they all practice the same asanas. This thing, I don't remember, they call it what is the name? There's the Pattabhi Joy system.
Vyasa.
No, the Pattabhi Joy system.
Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga.
Vinyasa, yeah. So, what I see is that there are more and more training in 1 month. Right now, I'm fighting against somebody who has developed a teacher training only online with 13 classes. And so the publicity is get a new job and you'll be happy. And we all know that 80% of yoga teachers, they don't have enough income. Anyway, so what is spreading is this Hasana movement all over the world. And it's very strong, very, very strong. I don't know if we can reduce this, because it is deeply rooted in people's mind today that yoga is body work. I remember that was in France. It was a whole weekend on Nidra and Mantra, and it was only for yoga teachers. And I remember on the Sunday afternoon, which was the last session, somebody asked and said, are we going to do some yoga before you go? I was puzzled. So it's difficult to know what the future of yoga could be. To a certain extent, when COVID arrived, many yoga teachers went into bankrupt. And I thought that's a good thing, because there are too many. And there are many asana teachers. I have no idea I know in India there is a lot of brainstorming about this. But also India is very polluted by asana. I feel it's too late, that the idea is too much spread all over the world that yoga is body work. I remember an ascetic I met in 1981 in the forest in India, in the jungle, as they say. And we talk about this. And he said, don't worry, yoga will never die. But yes, there is all this going on.
Okay, and thank you.
enough.
Thank you so much for this talk.
Let's have lunch now.
Let's have lunch, and yeah.
I don't think there is food.
I hope we have this all recorded, everything that we talk about, and this will get to the broader audience. Thank you so much.